Garland, Texas, November 2011. 54-year-old Kelly Martin and her husband, Don, were decorating their family home for the holiday season. Don, a police officer, and Kelly, a teacher, had been together since college and shared 2 daughters, Lauren and Caitlin. While retrieving boxes from the attic, Kelly missed a step on the ladder, tripping and falling. She immediately felt a sharp pain in her back. Though the discomfort was severe, she endured it through the holidays, assuming it was a pulled muscle or a pinched nerve that would heal with time. However, when the pain persisted and worsened, she visited her doctor, who diagnosed her with a herniated disc caused by the fall. Physical therapy, painkillers, and muscle relaxers failed to provide relief. Eventually, her doctor referred her to a highly recommended neurosurgeon new to the area, Dr. Christopher Dunch. Renowned and well-respected, Dr. Dunch quickly earned the couple's trust. He assured Kelly and Don that her surgery was routine and would likely take no more than 45 minutes. "It's one of the simplest operations a neurosurgeon can perform," he explained. When Kelly asked if he'd ever experienced complications or fatalities during surgeries, he confidently replied, "No, knock on wood." And with this, her surgery was scheduled for March 2012. The day came around and Don waited patiently in the waiting area. But the 45 minutes Dr. Dunch said it would take would soon pass. Then it was an hour, then an hour and a half. It was almost at double the time now, and Don was starting to get worried. He asked one of the nurses to go and check, and about 20 minutes later Dr. Dunch came out. He said the surgery went well and Kelly was moving around but was in a lot of pain, so he upped the medicine. He said she may have to go up to the ICU and stay overnight, but she was going to be okay. Don was told he couldn't go and see his wife as they were still working on her, a phrase that sent a shiver down his spine. Don said something in his gut was telling him it was all off. He called Lauren and Caitlin and said they should come up. 2 hours later, Don and his daughters were still waiting around and panicking. They suddenly saw the ICU physician, Dr. Dunch, and the anesthesiologist walking towards them. The looks on their faces told the story before they even opened their mouths. The words no one wanted to hear. "We did everything we could." Kelly Martin had died. How had such a simple routine operation gone so devastatingly wrong? Don said Dr. Dunch never said a word, not even looking at the 3 of them. They were told by the ICU physician that it had been a medical miscalculation. Records later showed that during the surgery her blood pressure had plummeted and she went a gray color. As she regained consciousness after the surgery, she began to hit her legs, which had turned an odd color with splotches on them. Kelly had become so agitated. The nurses had to sedate her. She never woke up. Don said it was pure misery. "My world just ended right then and there." He started rocking back and forth. So enraged with emotion, he almost lunged at them. "I knew something was wrong and I wanted to hurt him," he said of Dr. Dunch. Caitlin said it was like being in slow motion, and as they said their goodbyes to Kelly, Don asked for some scissors so he could keep a little piece of her hair. They all drove home in silence. The medical examiner confirmed that Kelly had bled to death internally after one of her arteries was completely sliced. Don, Lauren, and Caitlin all had a terrible feeling. They weren't getting the full story. Something about Dunch was not sitting well with them and they wanted answers. But what had happened to Kelly Martin was sadly just the beginning, and soon a huge can of worms would start to open. But as always, sometimes you must go backwards slightly to move forwards. Born in 1971 in Montana, Christopher Daniel Dunch had originally set his sights on playing football. One of his teammates remembered him as not being very good at following orders and struggling with the most basic of drills, but someone that came back every practice trying to get it right. He made multiple transfers and moved around so much that he was told this had taken away his eligibility to play professionally. He realized his football dream was over and suddenly made a drastic change. He abruptly switched to a career in medicine. In 1995, he received his undergraduate degree from the University of Memphis before getting his MD there too. He excelled in medical school to such a point that he was allowed to join the Alpha Omega Medical Honor Society and started working with Russian scientists on research programs, gaining $3 million in funding. He started his surgical residency at the University of Tennessee and was soon running 2 labs. He was described as a charming, smooth-talking and witty guy with a glowing 12-page resume. He had many people speaking highly of him and seeking him out. But despite all of his successes and accolades, things were slowly starting to unravel, and it was becoming clear that all was not as it appeared. His resume boasted that he had earned a doctorate in microbiology from the prestigious St. Jude's Children's Research Hospital, but there was no such program running at the hospital at that time. He also claimed to have gotten his PhD from the University of Tennessee Health Center, but he appears in no yearbooks from the university during that period. The school declined to verify his claims, citing a federal privacy law. Since college, he had been a drug user and a big drinker, but during his residency was when his drug use started to escalate. He was frequently taking LSD, cocaine, and illegally getting his hands on prescription painkillers. His ex-girlfriend Megan initially thought that this was just something he did occasionally, but it was clearly not the case. After a full night of drug taking, drinking vodka, and no sleep, Megan said he grabbed his scrubs and walked into work ready to talk to patients. She was horrified. His choice of drug was cocaine, although when he would come down after binges, he would rely on OxyContin, Xanax, and alcohol. Many said he would start his days off with a vodka and orange juice and a line of cocaine. One of his friends would later talk about just how out of control his drug use was, and several nurses said they saw him taking cocaine right before he went into surgery. But Dunch joked about it, calling them his neurostimulants, believing it made him better and more alert in theater. After he was reported, he was asked to take a drug test, which he refused to do. He was subsequently sent to an impaired physician program. In a deposition, slurring and not really concentrating, Dunch pleaded the fifth over and over again when asked about using drugs whilst working with patients. Despite the complaints, refusal to participate in tests, and after completing less than 100 surgeries, whereas it is typical for a resident to perform closer to 1,000, he was still allowed to finish his residency. In 2011, he was headhunted to join the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute in North Dallas with a $600,000 advance. Not long after, he was given surgical rights at the Baylor Regional Medical Center in Plano on a $50,000 a month salary. The recommendation that landed him the job had read, "Chris is extremely bright and possibly the hardest working person I have ever met," adding he had an excellent work ethic. For hospitals, surgeons are worth $1 million in revenue, on average about $2.5–1 million per year, and it is not uncommon to get operating privileges at other hospitals. Hence the reason Dutch was able to get a string of these across Dallas. Only a couple of months after he had finished his training, Dutch met another surgeon called Dr. Randall Kirby, a man that would play a key role in this story. Kirby said the first conversation he had with Dutch revolved around him telling him he was the best surgeon in Dallas and the only one a patient could trust. He said he wanted to clean the town up and was quite aggressive with his delivery. Kirby was taken aback with his level of arrogance, knowing how new he was to this game. Other doctors saw the same outbursts but put his cockiness down to the fact he was just a really talented surgeon, and he knew it. Opinions soon changed, however, when the only surgery he actually performed at the Minimally Invasive Spine Institute resulted in him being asked to leave. After the surgery was done, he immediately went on a trip to Las Vegas to party and left no one to look after his distressed patient. His drug use wasn't slowing down, and he would write many long emails to another ex-girlfriend and his surgical assistant, Kimberly, saying some very unhinged things, likely due to intoxication. One email read in part, "I really am building an empire. Anyone close to me thinks that I likely am something between God, Einstein, and the Antichrist. Because how can I do everything I want and cross every discipline boundary like it's a playground and never lose? I am ready to leave the love and kindness and good and patience that I mix with everything else that I am and become a cold-blooded killer." In more emails, he referenced his drug and alcohol abuse. These emails were full of swearing, threats, and rambling and abusive language. The emails themselves are too long to read in full, but they are interesting and present a small insight into his mind, so we have linked them in the description box if anyone wants to take a closer look. In December 2011, shortly before Kelly Martin approached him, Christopher had operated twice on a man called Ken Fennell. He was his first patient in North Texas. The surgery didn't help fix his back pain, as Dunge had operated in the wrong area, a mistake he admitted, but one he said he would correct with his second surgery. Ken, desperate to fix his pain, agreed. When Ken woke up the second time around, he described his legs as like a bonfire burning him. Something had gone wrong during the second surgery, but he had no idea what, and he left hospital relying heavily on a motorized wheelchair from that point on. Dunk's next patient was Lee Passmore, and he was actually an investigator in the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. He had undergone back surgery once before, but his pain had come back. Without missing a beat, Lee's pain specialist recommended Dr. Dunch. The surgery was booked right away. A vascular surgeon called Mark Hoyle assisted with the operation. Dr. Hoyle watched in horror as Dunch began to cut out a ligament around the spinal cord that should never have been touched. Right away, Lee started bleeding so profusely. Hoyle said the operating room was like a lake of red. Dunch not only left some hardware in Lee's spine, he also stripped the screw so it could not be moved. Unable to watch anymore, Dr. Hoyle said he blocked the incision area to try and stop Dutch from carrying on. "We need to talk about this," he said, locking eyes with Dutch. "That's dangerous. Even that attitude is dangerous. I've done 5,000 of these and I've never seen this done before." For the arrogant and careless surgeon, it was not enough to stop him. Hoyle said he left the operating room and vowed to never work with the surgeon ever again. Lee Passmore did survive the ordeal but lives with chronic pain and has a lot of trouble walking and balancing. The next patient to have his life irreparably changed was Barry Morguloff. Spending his life unloading trucks, his back was now in pain all the time. The only recommendation he got was Dr. Dunch, but Barry wasn't sure, nervous about getting surgery, and he spent hours poring over reviews about him and all his awards and accolades. Barry set up a meeting with the surgeon and clicked with him right away. He said he felt calm seeing how confident Dr. Dunch was. He said he was a very charming and disarming guy. A loving family man, it seemed. Phenomenal. Great guy. Loved him, Barry said. In January 2012, Barry was wheeled into surgery. The vascular surgeon assisting Dunch was none other than Dr. Randall Kirby. Dr. Kirby said of the operation, "In the spectrum of what a neurosurgeon does for a living, doing this procedure is probably the easiest thing that they do on a daily basis." Kirby watched as Dunst went right in without using the proper tools, grabbing at things that he shouldn't have been and haphazardly blundering around. Kirby argued with Dunch before changing tack and politely offering to take over the surgery. But Dunch insisted he knew what he was doing. Kirby left, but he was unable to shake this feeling that he had about Dunch and had had since the day he first met him. Barry woke up from the surgery in agony, a pain unlike anything he'd felt before. It would turn out that there were bone fragments that had been left in Barry's spinal canal. Another surgeon would later try and repair the damage, but Barry has to walk with a cane now, and his doctor said one day he will end up in a wheelchair. At one point, Barry was so depressed and sick that he contemplated taking his own life, believing it was the only way the mental and physical pain would end. Fortunately, his wife and children were able to pull him out of the dark place, and he began some intensive therapy. Dunk's childhood friend and now roommate Jerry Summers then approached him to perform a surgery on his back too. He had a herniated disc. The pair would often go out partying together, and Jerry even had access to Dutch's credit cards. To ask his good friend to do this simple surgery seemed like a given. The trust was already there, and Dutch was often talking about how highly in demand he was. But for Jerry, the dream situation would quickly turn into a nightmare. In surgery, he damaged Jerry's vertebral artery and the bleeding just wasn't stopping. 2 liters of blood was soon lost. Dunch packed the area with so much anticoagulant that it squeezed Jerry's spine. When Jerry woke up, he said he couldn't feel anything. He had no sensation in either of his arms or legs and was now completely paralyzed and would later require 247 round-the-clock care. Lying in the ICU, knowing that he was never going to recover, he turned to his girlfriend and said, "Kill me. I want to die." Dunk never once came to see his friend, see how he was, or even explain what had happened. In a depressed rage, Jerry told the nurses that Dunch had been taking cocaine the night before he performed the surgery. He later admitted he had just made this up. But knowing his friend and his drug usage, he felt it was a fairly educated assumption. His claim was taken seriously, and Dutch was ordered to take a drugs test. The test would never happen, as Dutch claimed he got lost on his way there. He did pass a separate psychological evaluation, and just 3 weeks later, he was allowed to start operating again, but was instructed to stick to minor procedures. But after this, we come back to Kelly Martin's case. She would be his next patient. After Kelly died, officials ordered Dunge to take another drug test. This time, he took it. The first screening came back as showing it had been diluted with water, and the second, a few days later, was clean. Some while later, Lee, still struggling to work, was allowed to resign from his job at the Collin County Medical Examiner's office. But before he left, a fax came through that stopped him in his tracks. There were 2 names at the top of the first page, Kelly Martin and Dr. Christopher Dunge. He sat and read what happened to her, shocked at what he was seeing. The cogs started turning as he connected the dots between that and his own botched surgery. He went down a rabbit hole and found a few months that were not accounted for in Dunge's educational history. He said you don't get to walk away from 2 to 3 years of medical training in the middle of an internship or a residency, get to take time off and be slotted directly in the position you left in with no questions asked. Maybe that's how they do it in Tennessee. But according to my training, that's not how they do it here. Then it all just started to unravel. Administrators at the put together a comprehensive review of all of Dunge's cases, and each time the same thing had happened. Patterns were showing and other surgeons were talking. Now someone was dead. This could not be ignored. After going through everything that had happened in that particular hospital alone, they determined he couldn't continue there. To the shock of the other surgeons and patients, the hospital did not fire him. Instead, they him to resign, remaining in good standing with his last day being in April 2012. Through a letter, Bela Plano said, "All areas of concern with regard to Christopher D. Dunge have been closed. As of this date, there have been no summary or administrative restrictions or suspension of Dunge's medical staff membership or clinical privileges during the time he has practiced at Baylor Regional Medical Center at Plano. The places that had asked him to leave chose to avoid the legalities of a potential wrongful termination and bad press of firing such a highly respected doctor, and instead let him quietly resign and move on with no repercussions. And as he technically left of his own choice, this meant that at least 2 facilities did not have to report him to a database run by the U.S. Department of Health and Human Services. This database is supposed to log information about problem practitioners, warning potential employers about their histories. They also failed to report him to the Texas Medical Board. When some of his patients tried to sue him for malpractice, most of them found it virtually impossible to find attorneys willing to take on their cases. In 2003, Texas enacted tort reform which reduced the amount of damages plaintiffs could win, with the number of malpractice payouts per year dropping by more than half. In July 2012, Dunge moved right on to the Dallas Medical Center. The background check they briefly ran on him came back clean. In the same month he joined, Dunge operated on 63-year-old Floella Brown, a banker looking forward to retirement. About 30 minutes into the surgery, the bleeding was so bad that Dunge said he couldn't see her spine. "Why is it still bleeding?" he kept saying. After a few scary moments, it seemed Dunge had got it under control, but nurses in the room were concerned. Although Floella woke up and seemed fine, early the following morning she lost consciousness as pressure was building up inside her brain for reasons that no one could work out. She was in critical condition and it wasn't looking good. While Floella lay in the intensive care unit, with doctors fighting to save her life, Dunge was set to go into another surgery with 71-year-old Mary Affard. Mary was very active and loved working out, but back pain was stopping her from living her life. The surgery was very simple, easily mastered by most first-year residents. Before the surgery started, nurses spotted a hole in Dunge's scrubs right at the back, showing he wasn't wearing underwear. One nurse, Kyle Kissinger, said he had seen the same hole for 3 straight days, and it was clear that Dunge wasn't even changing his scrubs between surgeries. As he stared into Dunge's eyes, he said he had pinpoint pupils and wasn't blinking. It was all very alarming. The surgery for Dunge was more of the same. The operating room staff questioned why he seemed to be drilling into random areas of her back carelessly and without paying any attention. Soon after the surgery on Mary started, Dunge turned to Kyle and said he wanted to perform a procedure on Floella called a craniotomy. This involves cutting a hole in the skull to relieve pressure on the brain. Kyle was shocked and said Dallas Medical Center did not perform these as they didn't have the proper equipment to be able to. Other people in the room were agreeing with what Kyle was saying, trying to talk him out of it. Unfortunately, he backed down. Floella was moved to another hospital, but she never regained consciousness, and her family withdrew her life support a few days later. A neurosurgeon was hired to review her case and death and would later conclude that Dunch had both pierced and blocked her vertebral artery with a misplaced screw. He also found that he had misdiagnosed the source of her pain in the first place and was operating in totally the wrong area. This had triggered a stroke, which had ultimately claimed her life. Mary Affard woke up from the surgery the same as the others before her, in total agony. She couldn't move her legs or feel her toes. Dr. Robert Henderson, another important person in this story, was called in to look at her case. He was an extremely talented Dallas spinal surgeon with 3 decades of experience. He pulled up her post-op x-rays, and the first thing he said was, "Some kind of travesty occurred." Mary was pulled back into surgery the next day with Dr. Henderson operating. There were 3 holes in Mary's spinal column where Dunce had tried and failed to insert several screws. One screw had hit the nerves that control one leg and the bladder. Dr. Henderson then discovered that Dunge had amputated on one of her nerve roots for reasons Henderson called inexplicable. The surgery had gone so badly and was so botched, Dr. Henderson wondered if Dunst was some sort of imposter dressing up and pretending to be a surgeon. He could think of no other reason why this had gone so wrong. Mary Affard now relies on a wheelchair. She has never regained mobility in her legs. She said one of her biggest loves was sewing. She used to do it all the time, but as she can't pick up her foot, she can't do this anymore. "Pain is really my life," she said. Dr. Henderson was horrified and took his findings to the hospital administrators, and he and Dr. Kirby both started sharing stories. Dr. Kirby had operating privileges at over 60 hospitals across Texas. And wherever he went, someone at some point would come up to him with a story about Dr. Dunch. Thanks to the fuss the pair kicked up, hospital officials told Dunch he would no longer be able to operate at Dallas Medical Center. However, yet again, he wasn't fired or suspended. He was allowed to leave quietly. People were going in for the most simple, routine, and standard surgeries and procedures, and they were coming out worse than they went in. And in the case of Kelly Martin and Flavella Brown, they weren't coming out at all. It had taken months and multiple catastrophic and fatal surgeries. But finally, Dr. Dunst was reported to the state medical board. However, this was not the simple fix surgeons like Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby thought. It would take almost a whole year for the board to investigate, all the while Dunk was operating elsewhere. Things went quiet for a little while until December 2012. Dr. Kirby was asked to assist with a woman called Jacqueline Troy. She had had neck surgery and was now battling a severe infection. Dr. Kirby found that the surgeon who had operated on her had cut her vocal cords and one of her arteries. "Is it a guy named Christopher Dunch?" he asked. He knew the answer already, and of course the answer was yes. Dunge was finally reported to the National Practitioner Databank, but even after the report was filed, Dr. Kirby found that another hospital had given him operating privileges. Although Dunge didn't realize this, Jeff Glidewell would be his last patient. Jeff, always an outdoors-loving man, had had a motorbike accident years before, and his back and neck had never been the same. He had come across Dunch in an advert that was showing the best neurosurgeons in the Dallas area. Despite everything going wrong for Dunk's patients, it seemed he was still the talk of the town. As a superstitious man, Jeff saw 3 black cats on the way into the hospital and said his gut told him to turn around. Reassured by his wife, they carried on for the surgery. Hours later, Dutch was nowhere to be found. 3 hours after the surgery was supposed to start, Dutch finally turned up in a cab claiming he had a flat tire. His jeans were frayed. He was sweaty and disheveled, and Jeff said he didn't look at all ready for the surgery. His bad feeling grew, but he kissed his wife goodbye and went into the operating room. At this point, unbeknownst to Jeff, the state medical board had been investigating Dutch for about 10 months. During the surgery, Dutch thought that part of Jeff's neck muscle was a tumor and stopped operating on him halfway through. He cut into Jeff's vocal cords, punctured an artery, and cut a hole in his esophagus. Dutch used a sponge to stop the bleeding and stitched Jeff back up with the sponge still inside him. Dunge came out and told Jeff's wife Robin he had found a tumor confirmed by a quick biopsy, and therefore he couldn't possibly carry on. But there was no tumor and there had been no biopsy. Robin went in to see Jeff in the recovery room. Jeff was so distressed he couldn't swallow and breathlessly mumbled, "Where's the doctor? I can't move my arm or my leg. Something's wrong. What did he do to me?" Dunge finally showed his face and Jeff, now battling an infection as well, said, "I can't move my arms." Dunge replied, "Well, I don't know what to tell you about that," before strolling off. None other than Dr. Randall Kirby was called in to correct the damage, and at this point he was quite literally losing his mind. How did this keep happening, and when was it going to end? On a scale of difficulty, this was about a 2 out of 10 procedure. He said this was not an operation that was performed. This was attempted murder. It was like a crazed maniac procedure. Dr. Kirby went directly to the Texas Medical Board and Robin went to the police. The officer she spoke to said they didn't have the resources to file criminal charges against a doctor. She went back to Dr. Kirby asking if she could contact the medical board too, and a statement was drafted. Jeff Glidewell would leave the hospital months later partially paralyzed and with only one vocal cord. He has nerve damage in one arm and can only eat small bites of food at a time. But Dutch would again move elsewhere. In May 2013, Dr. Henderson and Dr. Kirby opened up their emails to find an invite to a Meet the New Specialist dinner. University General Hospital was throwing an event to welcome a new neurosurgeon joining their team, Dr. Christopher Dunch. They simply couldn't believe it. This was Dunch's third hospital in 18 months. Dr. Kirby said he picked up the phone right away and called the hospital to, in his words, raise holy hell. He then sent them a 6-page letter which read in part, "Let me be blunt. Christopher Dunch, Texas Medical Board license number N8183, is an impaired physician, a sociopath, and must be stopped from practicing medicine." In the letter, Kirby told the hospital they could either address it and do something about it, or he would be calling every media outlet in Texas. With so much talk in the medical community and between family members, the stories were traveling fast. An article was published about him online referring to him as Dr. Death and quoted Dr. Kirby and all of his findings. Dunch took to the comment section to threaten Dr. Kirby if he kept talking. But in this case, there was no such thing as bad publicity, because finally in June 2013, Christopher Dunch was suspended and ordered to stop operating. Dunch was able to issue some sort of appeal through a lawyer and said he didn't have the time to use drugs or drink, even if he wanted to, because he was too busy. He said he was a hard worker, and he even threatened to sue Dr. Kirby for slander. He claimed he was at the center of a vast conspiracy to bilk money from the hospitals where he practiced. When asked why it had taken so long for the suspension to happen, the head of the medical board said at the time, "It's not uncommon for there to be complications in neurosurgery. None of us rush to judgment. That's not fair. And in the long run, it can come back to be incorrect. To suspend a physician's license, there has to be a pattern of patient injury. So that was ultimately what happened. But it took until June of 2013 to get that established," he added. For Drs. Henderson and Kirby, it wasn't good enough. Dr. Henderson said the words suspended implied he might be allowed back at some point, and they couldn't let that happen. Dr. Kirby, Dr. Henderson, and another doctor contacted the district attorney arguing that Dunch was a criminal. They got a meeting, but nothing happened. In December 2013, almost 2 years since Kelly Martin had died, the medical board permanently revoked Dutch's license. Despite his huge salary, Dutch was now in dire straits financially. He had to file for bankruptcy, owing more than $1 million, and leave Texas, moving in with his parents in Colorado. He would come back and forth to see his 2 young sons, but it appeared the relationship with his girlfriend Wendy had fallen apart too. A month after moving, he was pulled over by police in the early morning hours. He was driving on the wrong side of the road with 2 flat tires. As soon as they spoke to him, the smell of alcohol was strong and empty bottles littered the car floor. Dunt was arrested for a DUI and ordered into rehab. In March 2014, police were called in again to a bank in Dallas after people saw a man with blood on his hands and face banging on the doors and trying to get in. It was Dunch. He was wearing his scrubs and was incoherent, saying something about his family being in danger. He was swiftly taken to a psychiatric hospital. After his father had sent him some money, he was caught in a Dallas Walmart filling a cart with almost $1,000 of watches, sunglasses, computer equipment, and cologne. He bagged them up to hide them before picking out some clothes and putting them on in the dressing room. He then headed right for the front door but was stopped by security and arrested for shoplifting. His life was out of control and the wheels were starting to come off. Later that year, Bela Plano was told a lawsuit had been lodged against them by Ken Fennell and Lee Passmore, swiftly followed by Mary Affard and Barry Mergeloff. Bela Plano described this as extremely frustrating and difficult, adding that a lot of what had been said about them was misleading and that they never knowingly allowed one person to compromise the level of quality care they pride themselves on. Jeff Glidewell, still fighting to accept his life was now what it was but still wanting justice, made a call to a judge with everything he knew about Dunce. This would finally help bring the case back to the district attorney's attention and get the ball moving. We now meet someone else vital in bringing this case to a conclusion. Michelle Shugart, the assistant district attorney. The case instantly piqued her interest, as in her 13 years with the Dallas DA's office, she had never prosecuted a doctor. In fact, from looking at other cases like this, it seemed that no one had ever prosecuted a surgeon for what they had done in the operating room. It would become a case of firsts for many reasons. She began researching everything she could on Dunch, and it was staggering just how much was out there about him. She issued 800 subpoenas and spoke to over 100 people in person. In July 2015, 46-year-old Christopher Dunch was arrested on 5 aggravated assault charges. 1 count of injury to an elderly person, Mary Affard. He was also accused of maiming 3 patients and causing the deaths of at least 2. He was taken into custody and denied all the allegations. He was officially charged and pleaded not guilty. In Texas, the charge of injury to an elderly person carries a potential life sentence, but there were only 4 months left before the statute of limitations ran out. This was the big charge they were pushing to take to trial, as for various reasons, if they could obtain a conviction for this, it would be worth more in terms of years than any of the other charges. One lawyer said, "It's not worth an attorney's time and energy to take on a malpractice case. The outcome, sadly, would just not be worth it." The prosecution knew this was a tough case, but their goal was to get a sentence long enough to ensure he would never be able to practice medicine again. To the relief of the prosecution, Dutch was criminally charged in the maiming of Mary Affard. And this was the charge that went to trial. Dutch opted not to testify in his own defense. Despite the fact they were only focused on Mary's case, they still had a huge amount of people that were willing to testify against him to prove his negligence in the years before he even met Mary. Doctors Randall and Henderson took to the stand, as did Jerry via a video link from his home. Mary herself also testified. The prosecution said it was obvious he had intentionally, knowingly and recklessly harmed up to 15 of his patients, although we know there were many more people affected. Jeff Cheney woke up from his operation to find out that Dunk had removed part of his spinal cord by mistake, paralyzing the entire right side of his body. Jackie Troy found herself unable to talk as Dunk had paralyzed her vocal cords. Philip Mayfield paralyzed from the neck down. Marshall Muse spiraled into addiction after relying on pain pills following his surgery, and Pam Trusty feels lucky to be alive. However, Dunch's legal team claimed that he was not a criminal, just a lousy surgeon and a lazy person. They said him committing malpractice was due to chaotic operating rooms and hospitals in Dallas. And as for the emails he wrote to his ex-girlfriend Kimberly saying he would become a killer, they said it was simply sarcasm taken badly. Even his lead attorney said, "You have people in walkers, you have people on crutches, you have people that could barely move, you have people that had lost loved ones, you had all sorts of things that had gone wrong. Before we even get to Mary, you can see that it's going downhill. I mean, it's going downhill fast. So why didn't he stop?" Michelle asked. "Because of greed. Because he owed people a lot of money. He wanted to live the high life when a neurosurgeon makes big bucks. Why didn't he stop? Because he had no conscience. He doesn't care what he has left in his wake." In court, Dunst was calm and collected. His lawyer later said he truly and honestly thought he was doing a good job, and this all seemed shocking to him. He said until the experts started speaking, it seemed he was clueless as to the damage he caused. The jury took just 4 hours to return their verdicts. In July 2016, he was found guilty of 1 count of intentionally or knowingly causing serious bodily harm to an elderly individual. Dunch's family begged for some mercy when it came to the sentencing. They described him as a bright little boy who had taken care of sick birds and loved dogs. They acknowledged his issues but said everything he did came through a place of wanting to help people. In February 2017, Christopher Dunch was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 30 years. He filed an appeal in 2018, but his conviction was upheld. He's not eligible for parole until 2045, when he will be 74 years old. This case set a huge precedent. It is the first time in the United States that a physician has been convicted of criminal charges for actions in the course of their medical work. In June 2023, Texas Governor Greg Abbott signed a bill into law that would give the state's medical board additional ability to protect patients from potentially dangerous doctors. The bill, HB 1998, was introduced in response to an investigation that found at least 49 doctors were practicing in Texas despite having their licenses revoked in other states. To think about how many people these doctors were treating is shocking. There was no record of these actions on the Texas Medical Board's physician profile pages, despite being required by law. The new law includes several provisions which will better enable the board to protect patients and boost transparency. These include some of the following. Lying on a medical license application will be a Class A misdemeanor. Doctors who have had their medical licenses revoked, restricted, or suspended in another state will not be allowed to practice in Texas. All doctors will be required to be fingerprinted as part of a criminal background check and be monitored monthly via the National Practitioner Data Bank. The 4 hospitals that employed Dunch have ongoing civil cases against them as well. Sadly, not reporting these things is not uncommon. In 2011, a staggering 47% of hospitals did not report their restrictions or revocations of doctors' clinical privileges, leaving the doors wide open for the lack of paper trail to be taken advantage of. Questions had to be answered and accountability had to be taken. It highlighted the systemic problems within the healthcare field all the way to the top. The hospital officials which allowed him to leave rather than firing him and having him investigated issued a statement which read, "Our primary concern as always is with patients. Out of respect for the patients and families involved and the privileged nature of a number of details, we must continue to limit our comments. There is nothing more important to us than serving our community through high-quality, trusted healthcare. Trying to comprehend the amount of damage and destruction that Christopher Dunch has caused is impossible." Between May 2011 and June 2013, Dunch performed surgery on 38 people. 32 of them were left with life-changing injuries, in some cases completely paralyzed, and 2 had died. His case became quite a big part of mainstream media, with a hugely successful podcast being launched about it. And it was even made into a TV show on Peacock called Dr. Death. It was an all-star cast with Joshua Jackson playing Dunch and Christian Slater playing Dr. Randall Kirby. And this brings us to the amazing doctors that helped put an end to his career. One has to wonder if it wasn't for the perseverance of Dr. Kirby and Dr. Henderson, how much longer would Dunch have continued? Tragically, a 3rd victim's life would be claimed when in 2021, Jerry Summers, Dunch's patient and once dear friend, died from an infection connected to his botched surgery. We trust that when we need them, people in Christopher Dunch's position of authority, knowledge and power will look after us. They will care for us. They will make us better. We put our faith and trust in them that they will turn things around even when the odds might seem stacked against us. We hope that we are in good and safe hands. For the families that were affected by the crimes of Christopher Dunch, that trust will likely forever be broken. Kelly's husband Don Martin said, "My whole lifestyle has changed. Everything is different now. I look at life differently, totally differently. Life is too precious, too short. We can't take the little things for granted. We're just trying to make the best of each day." Discover the chilling world of secret crime mysteries, where we delve into the most perplexing cold cases and unsolved crimes. Join us as we unravel hidden clues and explore haunting mysteries. Subscribe now and be part of the journey to bring these cases to light. Gertrude Tompkins was born in 1912 in Jersey City and grew up in Summit, New Jersey, located in Union County. She was the youngest of 3 daughters. Her father, an inventor who found success in the cement industry, encouraged his daughters, Margaret, Elizabeth, and Gertrude, to pursue intellectual interests. As a child, Gertrude was shy and introverted, partly due to a stutter for which her parents were unable to find an effective therapy. Despite this, her family provided her with a well-rounded education and rich life experiences during her young adulthood. She spent time raising goats, earned an undergraduate degree in horticulture in Pennsylvania, and traveled across Europe visiting gardens. Gertrude was fluent in both Italian and French, remarkably speaking these languages without her stutter. Her passion for flying began in 1940 when she fell in love with a pilot who started teaching her to fly during their time together. Although it was uncommon for women to be pilots at the time, Gertrude pursued the training and eventually earned her pilot's license. The couple became engaged, but Gertrude's fiancé joined the Royal Air Force so as to fight in World War II before the United States entered it. He was killed when his plane was shot down over the English Channel. The death of her fiancé instilled a desire to help with the war effort in Gertrude. In September of 1942, a seemingly perfect opportunity arose for her to do so. As male pilots were being sent overseas, there was a shortage of them for military operations stateside. Therefore, the United States government began recruiting for the Women's Air Force Service Pilots, or WASP for short, program. The aim of the program was to use female pilots for tasks like military aircraft transport and testing so that male pilots could be sent into combat. Over 25,000 women applied for the program and only 1,800 were accepted. Gertrude was one of them. Out of those 1,800, only 1,100 successfully completed the program's rigorous training. Gertrude's stutter should have caused her to fail her training, as clear radio communication was of paramount importance. She overcame that problem by singing her responses and commands over the radio. Like when she spoke a foreign language, she did not stutter when she sang. Gertrude finally overcame her stutter for good shortly thereafter, supposedly as soon as she flew a P-51D for the first time. She was one of only 126 members of her training class selected to fly fighter planes and attend advanced pursuit school in Brownsville, Texas. While she was initially assigned to fly the P-51D, she ultimately had the experience of flying a variety of fighter planes. On September 25, 1944, Gertrude married Henry Silver, a businessman from New York who was serving in the Army. 2 days later, she returned to her assignment in California, where she did not disclose her marriage. The women in the program were preferred to be unmarried. Gertrude may have decided to get married when she did because Henry Silver was petitioning to adopt his orphan niece at the time. He and Gertrude planned to make a home for the little girl at the end of the war. Gertrude did not discuss her marriage, use her married name, or wear her wedding ring in California. On October 26, 1944, at approximately 4 p.m., Gertrude took off from Mines Field, now a part of Los Angeles International Airport, piloting a brand new P-51D Mustang. She was to fly the plane to Newark, New Jersey. From there, the plane was going to be sent overseas. Gertrude was one of 40 pilots transporting planes that day. Gertrude, as well as 2 of the other pilots, were delayed due to problems with the canopies of their planes. Their flights for the day had to be cut short due to the delay, so they would just be flying to Palm Springs, California on this leg of the trip. Gertrude was the last to take off. She did not arrive in Palm Springs, but the other pilots assumed that there had been a further problem with her canopy and that she had gone back to Mines Field. The trip to Newark would have taken 3 days with numerous stops in perfect weather and under perfect conditions in the P-51D Mustang, particularly in light of the initial problem with the plane's canopy. No one was surprised when Gertrude did not arrive at Newark after just 3 days. After 5 days, however, officials realized that she was missing. Since Gertrude never arrived at any other airport after taking off from Mines Field, it was assumed that she crashed shortly after her takeoff from there. The search for the site of her presumed crash has therefore largely focused on the Santa Monica Bay, just west of Mines Field. The military launched a search that lasted for a month, but no sign of Gertrude or her plane was ever found. Searches for Gertrude's plane have continued over the ensuing decades, aided by advances in technology. Such searches were made in 1999, 2001, and 2004. In October of 2009, a massive underwater search was conducted by a group of 35 experts who volunteered their services. They were particularly hopeful that this search would finally solve the mystery of Gertrude's appearance, so that they could finally provide answers to Gertrude's sister, Elizabeth Tompkins Whittall, who was 100 years old and living in Florida. Gertrude's plane was not found during the course of the week-long search. The search did, however, locate the wreckage of a T-33, a jet that went missing in 1955, finally providing answers to the families of the two pilots who had been on board, Air Force Lieutenants Richard Martin Feeler and Paul Dale Smith. Elizabeth Tompkins Whittall passed away in 2010 at the age of 101. The Women Air Force Service Pilots program was ended in December of 1944 as more male pilots were available for the tasks it had undertaken. The women who flew as pilots during it were not considered to be part of the armed forces and therefore were not entitled to any of the benefits or honors given to veterans. In the 1970s, many of them lobbied Congress for recognition of their service, and in 1977 they were finally given military status. In July of 2009, following a bipartisan effort in Congress, President Obama signed a bill awarding the Congressional Gold Medal to the Women Air Force Service pilots. Gertrude's presumably crashed plane has never been located, and her disappearance remains unsolved. Naomi Chaney was born on September 20, 1918 in Jasper, Alabama. She graduated from high school in Pensacola, Florida before continuing her studies at Florida State College for Women. She taught high school for one term after graduating from college in 1942, but then decided she wanted to be a part of the war effort. Naomi therefore enlisted in the Women's Army Corps and was sent to Fort Des Moines, where she entered officer school on April 26, 1943. She received her officer's commission on June 5. That September, she was transferred to the Technical School of the Army Air Forces Training Command in Sioux Falls, South Dakota. She arrived there on September 4th. On October 5, 1943, Lieutenant Chaney had dinner at the base's officers' club. She then went to visit her roommate, who was in the hospital on the base. Lieutenant Chaney did not leave the base until 9 o'clock that evening, well after it had gotten dark. She and her roommate had just moved into a home at 525 South Euclid Avenue 2 days earlier from another home in town. It was common practice for civilians to rent out rooms to board service members in their homes at the time due to the rapid increase in personnel assigned to the base because of the war. Her walk home from the base should have taken her roughly 25 minutes. Lieutenant Chaney left the base through gate number 3, which opened onto what is today called Burnside Street but at the time was northwest, near its intersection with Western Avenue. Before leaving, she asked the guard at the gate if he thought she would be safe walking home in the dark. He told her she would have to use her own judgment. After weighing her options for a few minutes, Lieutenant Chaney left the base and began walking home. A cab driver would later report having seen her a short time later, just down the road near the intersection of Northwest and 6th Street. The lieutenant did not report to the base the following morning and was classified as being absent without leave. Military police went to the home where she was staying to try to find her, but she was not there. They became concerned when Lieutenant Chaney could still not be found by that afternoon. Around 5 p.m. that day, a 10-year-old girl named Val Hall was out looking for sumac leaves in a wooded area not far from her home. She came across a woman lying motionless in the middle of a path in a thicket underneath a viaduct crossing the train tracks near 12th Street and Grange Avenue. The woman was Lieutenant Chaney, and she was deceased. Her autopsy would later estimate that she had died approximately 18 hours earlier. Her body was found less than 3 blocks from her home. Lieutenant Chaney's autopsy determined that she had died as a result of a crushing blow the right side of her head, which had resulted in numerous skull fractures and brain hemorrhages. The exact location of her body made it impossible for her to have fallen or been thrown from the viaduct. She had not been sexually assaulted, and there was no evidence that such an assault was even attempted. Her uniform was intact and only slightly rumpled. One of her shoes was, however, scuffed and had its toe box crushed as though someone had stomped on the lieutenant's foot. Her visor cap was found not far from her body, as was her purse, which still had cash inside of it, seemingly eliminating robbery as a potential motive in the crime. Two doctors did debate the nature of Lieutenant Cheney's death at the coroner's jury convened to evaluate it. Dr. Garundo, an associate professor of pathology at the University of South Dakota, argued that the lieutenant had not been murdered and that her injuries had been caused by her skull being run over by a car. He claimed that his examination of her vocal cords showed that she had not screamed prior to her death and argued she would have screamed had she been attacked. Even if his examination was able to definitively prove that Lieutenant Cheney had not screamed, there is no way to prove that she had not been ambushed by a killer, which seems like a probable scenario given the fact that her body showed few signs of a struggle and no signs that she had been restrained. Dr. Garundo used these facts to instead further try to support his claim that no murder had occurred. The area where the lieutenant was found was not accessible by car. Dr. Giordano argued that she had still been able to walk after sustaining the massive head injury. There was no reported blood evidence at the scene beyond the large pool underneath Lieutenant Cheney's head, meaning she would have had to make the long walk with a serious wound without dripping any blood on the ground or down her uniform in Dr. Garundo's scenario. Arguing that Lieutenant Cheney had been murdered was Dr. Erickson, a Sioux Falls surgeon who had assisted with her autopsy. He pointed out that if the lieutenant had been hit by a car, she would most likely have more extensive injuries and damage to her uniform. He also claimed that the head injury was too severe for her to have walked at all after sustaining it, much less to have walked to the area where she was found, so far away from anywhere accessible by car. His assessment of her injuries was that they were caused by the lieutenant's head either being struck with a blunt object or being stomped or kicked while she was on the ground. The jury was convinced by Dr. Erickson's testimony, and Lieutenant Cheney's death was officially ruled a homicide. On October 6th, authorities brought a suspect into custody as he was trying to leave town. The 31-year-old man, whose name has never been made public, had a wife and children in Iowa but worked as a farmhand throughout the region. While in Sioux Falls, he had been staying at a cabin at Smith's Auto Court, not far from where Lieutenant Cheney's body had been found. He was brought in because authorities had discovered blood-matted hair near his cabin. When the suspect was questioned, he also had blood on his shoe. He theorized that the blood had gotten onto the shoe as he walked through grass that morning. However, the blood was on the top of the shoe, not on the sole. The FBI was able to determine that the blood from the suspect's shoe and matted hair was the same type as Lieutenant Cheney's blood, but the technology of the time could not more conclusively tie the evidence to her. The suspect maintained his innocence and was released on October 27th as authorities had no other evidence to implicate him in the murder. At the time, he was in the process of joining the Army. After he enlisted, he was sent overseas and was killed in action. City and military police both worked on the case, traveling the country to conduct interviews and consulting with psychics Lieutenant Cheney had visited before her death. The Army offered a $1,000 reward in the case at the beginning of 1944, but none of these efforts brought resolution to the case. The murder of Lieutenant Cheney remains the oldest unsolved homicide in Sioux City. Gertrude Canning was born in County Donegal and lived with her family outside of Lifford. She shared her family's love of music and dancing and was described by those who knew her as happy and likable with an adventurous spirit. She eventually left Ireland to work at various hotels in England. She was popular with her co-workers and customers. Following the outbreak of World War II, Gertrude joined the Women's Royal Naval Services. She was assigned to the HMS Quebec, a Navy base that was part of the No. 1 Combined Training Center on the shores of Loch Fyne near the small town of Inverary, Scotland. The town had a population of less than 500 people, but between 1940 and 1944, almost a quarter of 1 million soldiers and personnel came through the area to work at the training center, with approximately 15,000 people there at any given time. Gertrude was able to use her previous experience working in the hospitality industry at the base, working in the officers' mess hall at the Admiralty House. On June 30th, 1942, 20-year-old Gertrude left the base, dressed in her uniform, to mail a letter to her father. She never returned. She was reported missing and a massive search for her began. However, it would be two local boys who would finally resolve the search. They were gathering wildflowers near a local landmark known as the Marriage Tree when they discovered Gertrude's body in a ditch in Inverary. Gertrude had been gagged with her own clothing and 4 bullets were removed from her body. 3 of the bullets had caused injuries that most likely would have killed Gertrude on their own. Examination of the bullets showed that they had been fired by a standard British Army .30 revolver, a weapon that thousands of men in the immediate area had been issued. 2 roadmen reported seeing Gertrude on the 30th as she was walking along a wooden track. They also reported that they saw a soldier walking in the same direction just a few moments later. Thousands of revolvers were test-fired looking for a match to the bullets found in Gertrude's body. The weapons tested had been assigned to soldiers who were still at the training center and to soldiers who had left it since Gertrude disappeared and had been tracked down and brought back to the center for the testing. Despite the extensive testing, no match to the bullets that killed Gertrude was found. One of the investigators who worked on the case was Detective Inspector Robert Calhoun out of Glasgow. Only a limited amount of information was released to the media at the time of the murder due to its connections to the training center. So much of what is known about the investigation comes from Calhoun's 1962 memoir, Life Begins at Midnight. In the book, he concludes that Gertrude was most likely murdered by a soldier she was familiar with and that, in all probability, he died at Dieppe and his secret died with him. The disastrous August 1942 raid on the German-occupied French port of Dieppe plays a part in more than one theory about the case and how the investigation was handled. Gertrude's murderer could of course ended up as one of the thousands of casualties at Dieppe. There has also been speculation that certain details about Gertrude's murder were kept quiet because the idea of a soldier committing a murder just outside of the combined training center would further destroy public morale around the war effort, both before the raid occurred, when preparations were being made for it, and afterwards when public confidence was on the decline. Journalist, author, and former Glasgow police officer R.J. Mitchell has raised concerns that Gertrude's killer may have been someone influential in the military, potentially even someone involved with the planning of the raid on Dieppe. During the course of his own investigation into the case, he learned from a military expert that the .38 revolver used in Gertrude's murder was only issued to commissioned officers and to officers with the rank of second lieutenant or higher. However, it has also been argued that someone with a lower rank could have still acquired one without having it formally issued to them, given how common they were. Another major problem Mitchell has identified with the investigation into Gertrude's murder is the underutilization of the 2 witnesses who saw Gertrude and the unidentified soldier on the day of her murder. According to Calhoun's account of the investigation in his memoir, there was no composite of the soldier produced. It wouldn't have been difficult to get descriptions and get an artist's impression. Then compare this with the soldier's mugshots and see which branch of the service he came from, Mitchell argued in 2013. The minute I realized that fundamental aspect was missing from Calhoun's book, I thought this isn't right, and it had the whiff of a cover-up. Despite the decades that have passed since her murder, Gertrude's family has remained committed to her and her story. Several of her nephews have been active in keeping her case in the media. One of those nephews, Liam Canning, has spent years researching his aunt's life and death in hopes of writing a book and believes he may know the identity of a potential suspect. From what has been presented to the family, I could certainly identify who I think is a suspect, he told the BBC in 2012. Police in Scotland have said that if the case were to come before them now, they would solve it. The suspect has never been publicly identified, however, and the case is still unsolved. The Canning family says that their efforts have not been out of malice towards Gertrude's killer and that they do not want revenge against him, just justice for Gertrude. While so far they have not been able to definitively identify her killer, they have found other ways of showing respect for her and her memory. To mark the 70th anniversary of Gertrude's death, the family dedicated a plaque to her memory in Inverary. Emily Grace Jones was born in Bolton on January 18, 2013, to her parents, Sarah and Mark. Mark worked as a credit manager while Sarah was a solicitor. Emily was their only child. She was described as a joyful and laughter-filled girl with a heart as big as her smile. She loved outdoor activities and sports, eagerly diving into any adventure. Fearless by nature, Emily enjoyed hiking, climbing, swimming, and horseback riding. Mark described her as a sociable, outgoing daredevil. Her teacher noted her creativity and love for drawing and writing stories. Emily was popular with her classmates, getting along with everyone. Bright and diligent, she often joked with her teachers about finishing her work before her classmates had even written the date. Although Mark and Sarah were no longer together, they maintained good terms and shared co-parenting responsibilities. Mark typically spent Sundays with Emily, and on Sunday, March 22, 2020, they arranged to meet at Queen's Park. It was Mother's Day, and Emily had given Sarah a card earlier that morning. Around 2:15 p.m., while Emily was riding her scooter with Mark cheering her on, she saw Sarah jogging nearby and excitedly said, "Daddy, Daddy, I want to go to Mom." He told her she could, and she set off. Emily called out to Sarah, but Sarah didn't hear her because she had headphones in and was too far away. As Emily scooted over, Mark saw a woman stand up from a bench and go towards his daughter, and Emily was suddenly on the ground. But he was unsure exactly what had happened. He assumed that she'd fallen over as he could hear her crying and that the woman was helping her up. People nearby began shouting, clearly horrified and distressed, saying that his daughter had been stabbed. The woman, who had her hood up briskly, walked away with a knife in her hand. Mark immediately ran over to his daughter. She had a catastrophic injury to her neck and was struggling to breathe. Her dad told her, "Just stay with me, Emily, stay with me. Don't leave me." Sarah was still in the park, but was unaware of what had happened. Mark called her, and a nurse came over and quickly began to try and help Emily. She was deteriorating rapidly. One of the people in the park at the time, Tony Canty, was there with his wife and baby daughter. He ran after the woman who had been seen with Emily as she tried to flee the scene. He wasn't exactly sure what had happened, or if she was armed, but continued to chase her. Tony's wife gave Mark her baby's muslin cloth to try and stop Emily's heavy bleeding. The emergency services arrived within minutes, and paramedics worked quickly to try and save her. The first paramedic to get there saw Emily being hugged by her father from behind as she lay on the ground. She was bleeding heavily and unconscious. She was also in cardiac arrest. The paramedics began to administer CPR, and she was given adrenaline before being loaded into the air ambulance. As he pursued her, Tony's wife told him that the woman had a knife on her, but he still bravely carried on, disregarding his own safety, instead prioritizing the safety of others. He knocked the woman to the ground and sat on her to stop her from running away, and also called 999, telling the operator, "There's been an incident at Queen's Park in Bolton and a child's bleeding." He also spoke about the woman. "I don't know what she's saying. She is agitated." His wife also heard the woman saying that she no longer needed injections, Tony had killed her family, and that he was killing her. Tony told her, "You're not well. The police will help you." The woman said to Tony, "I don't need you to tell me to be calm." He proceeded to keep hold of her until the police arrived and took over. A cordon was put up around the area, and specialist officers were on the case, trying to build a clear picture of what had happened. Emily was taken to Salford Royal Hospital, and the helicopter landed there at 3:27 p.m. She was ventilated and given blood transfusions, but remained in cardiac arrest. Tragically, at 3:56 p.m., all the attempts to restart her heart had failed, and Emily's time of death was called. This was now a murder inquiry. The following day, Sarah was given the awful task of formally identifying her daughter's body. A post-mortem was carried out, and it was determined that Emily had died from an incised wound to the neck. In a statement, her family said, "We are beyond devastated that this random act of violence means we will never get to see our beautiful little girl grow up into the wonderful young lady she was showing such promise of becoming. It is truly heartbreaking to wake up to a world without Emily in it, and we cannot comprehend why this has happened. We would like to thank the members of the public that assisted us in the park and express our gratitude to the emergency services for doing their utmost to save Emily's life." The community was in shock. The teachers from her school were heartbroken, and her headmistress paid tribute to her, saying, "I want you to know how much Emily was loved. She will be missed by all her friends and all the staff. Her loss has left a hole in our hearts, and the school will never be the same again." The police needed to start building a picture of their suspect. The woman they had arrested was 30-year-old Altiona Scana, and she was detained under the Mental Health Act. Dr. Suhanthini Farrell was the on-call doctor when she was arrested. She was said to be cooperative and calm, and when asked about her mental state, she responded, "Not very well." She said she couldn't remember anything about the park. But Dr. Farrell said this appeared to be because she didn't want to discuss it, not because she couldn't remember it. Dr. Farrell also described her as emotionless. When she was arrested, she was found to have wire tied around her toes. A police officer asked what this was for, and Eltona responded that it was to help her with her emotions. Before it was taken off, she tried to tighten it around her toes again. A doctor would later say that this was indicative of a psychotic action. Eltona Scana had been born in February 1990 in Albania. According to Eltona's sister, their father had got into debt, and in February 2012, Eltona was forced to marry the man he owed money to, and they then moved to Kuwait. She fled in September the following year and returned to Albania. In 2014, she left Albania again, and this time headed to Frankfurt, Germany, and on August 11th, her sister paid for her to go to the United Kingdom. She was taken via Italy and France, and entered the UK in a lorry 2 days later, on August 13th. She had made an application to the Home Office for asylum, but this was rejected in June 2018. An appeal was made and this decision was reversed, and she was then given a residency permit to remain in the country until November 28, 2020, and then leave to remain until November 2024. This was despite her later admitting to doctors that she had lied in her application and falsely said she was a victim of sexual exploitation, something she had said to improve her chances of being allowed to stay in the country. The Home Office has not revealed if they were informed that she had admitted to lying. In March of 2015, her mental health was not in a good place, and she was assessed by a doctor who determined that she had post-traumatic stress disorder, and she was subsequently referred for treatment. However, she failed to turn up for her cognitive behavioral therapy session, and her case was therefore closed. Just a few months later in July, Eltona had grabbed a knife and believed she was going to be attacked. Her sister reported it, and Eltona was sectioned and admitted to Royal Bolton Hospital for treatment. She was diagnosed with acute schizophrenia-like psychotic symptoms. She believed her neighbors were planning to hurt her by using her electricity. When she was granted leave by the hospital, she would run away on several occasions. After refusing oral medication, she was given antipsychotic medications via injection. She did lodge an appeal against being sectioned, but on August 20, 2018, it was determined that she was well enough to be released, as the feelings she had about her neighbors trying to hurt her had reduced, as had her feelings of being persecuted. As part of being released, she was visited by mental health workers between 1 and 2 times a week. Eltona complained about the injections of the antipsychotic medications, saying she didn't like the side effects. In November 2015, she was taken off the medication, but her mental health would soon deteriorate again. On December 9th, she told doctors at the Salford Royal Hospital that she was having auditory hallucinations on a daily basis. It was reported that Eltona's own mother did not believe she should be on medication and didn't agree with the decision to prescribe her any. In January 2017, she refused to let her care coordinator come into her property and did not attend a scheduled meeting. Her sister was now greatly concerned about Eltona's mental health and that she was suffering a relapse, so she arranged for a team to visit her again on February 13th. But before this could happen, Eltona would commit a shocking act of violence. Her mother had come to visit her, and she had found that Eltona had been trying to hurt herself. Eltona led her mother upstairs and proceeded to chain the door shut. She said that once she killed her mother, everything would be okay. She then attacked her with an iron, stabbed her hand, and was only stopped when a friend intervened. She was subsequently arrested and detained under the Mental Health Act. It later emerged that she had disconnected the boiler, removed the light bulbs in the property, and got rid of her television. She would again leave the hospital without permission, and at 5 a.m. went to a friend's house and demanded to speak to their 13-year-old daughter. She was armed with a knife that she had taken from a restaurant. The mother refused to let her inside, and when she asked Eltona about what she had done to her hair, Eltona said she had cut her hair off rather than cutting off people's heads. She was returned to the hospital by police, and on the May 4th, she was deemed fit for release. All appeared to go quiet. That was until March of 2018. Altiona said she was not feeling well and requested to go back on injections. She said she was having hallucinations again. The following year, she asked to be taken off the injections and be on oral medication instead. She remained stable and her family's support appeared to help with her paranoia, although she continued to avoid busy places and wore sunglasses to avoid eye contact. Her last visit with a mental health worker was on the March 11, 2020, after having none for 3 months. It was so uneventful that the worker didn't even make any notes. Just 11 days later, she would take Emily's life. On the morning of March 22, 2020, Altona had left her home at around 1 p.m. and headed into Bolton Town Center. She purchased a pack of 3 crafting knives from a pound shop, later telling a psychiatrist that she had bought them with the intention of killing someone. She then went to Queen's Park. A witness later reported that he had seen a woman sitting on the ground with her legs crossed next to a bench, and added that she appeared to be agitated. He noted that she had a vacant look on her face, which also caught his attention. He continued to watch her for around 4 minutes, but as she didn't say or do anything, he headed home. As Emily headed to Sarah, she went past the bench Altiona was sat on with her hood pulled up. Out of nowhere, she stood up, grabbed Emily into a headlock, and launched a ferocious attack against the little girl, stabbing her in the neck and slitting her throat. Police went to her flat and searched it, and found a load of antipsychotic medication, totaling almost a month's worth that hadn't been taken. A doctor would later say that suddenly coming off of medication could cause someone's mental health to rapidly decline within just a few days. She was charged with murder and possession of a bladed article. She was remanded in custody and scheduled to appear at Manchester and Salford Magistrates Court on Tuesday, May 26th. As the preliminary murder hearing got underway at Manchester Crown Court, Judge Richard Mantle QC expressed his sympathy for Emily's family, saying to Mark, "I can't imagine the level of pain you and your wife are going through at the moment, and you have my personal and deepest sympathy, as well as the sympathy of everyone involved in the court's process." Mark was there for the hearing, and Altona appeared via a video link from Rampton Secure Hospital, a high-security psychiatric hospital where she was being held. She ended a plea of guilty to manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility, and prosecutors were given 7 days to consider her plea. They eventually decided to push ahead with a murder trial. It was now time for Altona Scana to go on trial for murder. The prosecution told the jury that it would be for them to decide whether or not this was actually a case of manslaughter, or if she was using her mental health condition as what they referred to, a convenient excuse for what she had done. The court heard evidence that whilst in hospital she had spoken to a nurse, and the conversation had pointed to this being something that had been planned, therefore not manslaughter, but rather a premeditated and calculated killing. It also emerged that from the middle of December 2019 to March 11th the following year, she had not had any face-to-face contact with mental health workers. In a report read out to the court, one of the doctors said that Altona represented a very high risk of serious, potentially fatal harm to others. The court heard that whilst in hospital she had been reportedly watching a child's television program. When a child who looked like Emily appeared on the screen, Altiona began to laugh hysterically. She said to a nurse at the hospital, "Like I said, it's been 3 months. What do you want me to do? Cry all the time?" Later telling the same nurse it was premeditated. "I waited in a park and picked my victim. I did what I did, then tried to run away." It was noted that during these conversations, she was not on her medication. The court was told that on the July 30th, staff at the hospital had been observing what was referred to as strange behavior, with Altiona telling nurses, "Your body has gone to your soul, and we're all going to die." Dr. John Crosby, a consultant psychiatrist, would tell the court that Altiona Skinner had paranoid schizophrenia, and said this had caused her to suffer from delusions and lose touch with reality. He said that there appeared to be no reason for Emily being singled out by her, adding that it was his conclusion. She was in the midst of a psychotic episode when she took Emily's life. Such a terrible, rare, random attack. "To my mind, I can't think of another reason why it could have occurred," he said. In a statement read to the jury, Mark said, "I do not know why this happened. Emily was simply riding her scooter to her mom. I simply can't explain it." He said that Emily was a vulnerable child, full of innocence and wonder. She was just starting off on her path of life, and her future was cut short. Our future has also been taken away. How can we enjoy life when the best part of it has been taken away? Evidence was given by a consultant forensic psychiatrist from the hospital where Altiona was being held, and it stated that the possibility of her being convicted of murder was not realistic. After the prosecution considered the medical evidence, it was agreed it would not be fair to ask a jury to convict her of the offense of murder, so the murder charge was withdrawn, and the jury was formally instructed to return a not guilty verdict on the charge of murder. Altona Skarner was therefore convicted of manslaughter on the grounds of diminished responsibility. Prosecutor Michael Brady QC told the court, "It is not a decision that has been taken lightly by the Crown. It's a decision taken with care and mindful of the sensitivity of the case. Having reviewed all the evidence in this case, the Crown has come to the conclusion that there is no longer any realistic prospect of conviction." The judge said in his sentencing remarks, "The devastating effects of what you did will live with Emily's parents, and doubtless others who knew Emily forever. It is obvious that nothing I can do or say can restore Emily to her family or offer any real comfort to them in their immense loss." He said he was satisfied on the basis of the evidence given that she had paranoid schizophrenia, saying that the nature and degree of it warranted her detention in hospital. Altiona Skarner will only be eligible for release serving her minimum term and being assessed as no longer being a danger to the public. The judge added, "If you are never deemed fit for release, you will remain in hospital or prison for the remainder of your days." It was later reported that her minimum term had been increased from 8 years to 10 years 8 months. The judge said that the original sentence had been calculated in error and added that he took full responsibility for it. After her sentence was increased, Mark said, "I will keep fighting tooth and nail for her to stay there for the rest of her life. Whether it's 10 years or 20, it won't be enough for me. As far as I'm concerned, she's a danger to the public for the rest of her life. She'd do it again to any child. I would bet my bottom dollar on that." At the inquest into Emily's death, the acting senior coroner, Alan Walsh, said, "In my 20 years as a coroner, this is one of the most tragic deaths that I have dealt with, and the loss of a beautiful, innocent, lively, intelligent, and lovely 7-year-old in these circumstances is an unimaginable tragedy." When talking about Altiona, the coroner Timothy Brennan said she had been deliberately masking her deteriorating condition, meaning that the mental health workers didn't know she was not taking her medication or that she was relapsing. He added that only with the benefit of hindsight could Altona's actions have been predicted. Emily's father Mark said that although he was glad the inquest was over, he disagreed with the finding. "I cannot believe he has come to that conclusion," he said. "They didn't realize the threat she posed, but it was their job to know. They may be underfunded and rushed off their feet, but they're a dangerous people. I don't think enough money goes into mental health services, but that's no excuse, especially when you're dealing with dangerous individuals. I don't feel like I've got closure. I want to change the system. It's my daughter, and it's down to me to make this right." Following the inquest, Mark's lawyer said, "She twice told doctors that she had lied in her asylum application. She twice told doctors and police that she wanted to go home, in 2015 and 2017. And the Home Office offered no explanation as to why they ignored these important clues in her presentation." A Home Office spokesperson said, "We are carefully considering the findings from the inquest and any further recommendations by the coroner." Mark said he has not forgiven Altiona for what she did. "I know people say it's good for your mental health to forgive, but in this instance I'm afraid I can't. How dare she touch my daughter? How dare she put her hands on her? So no, I can't forgive her." Altona Skarner would later appeal her sentence, but this appeal was rejected. Lady Justice McQuarrie said that there was sufficient evidence to find Altona knew that what she did was wrong and attempted to escape detention and escape the scene. Mark said he was more relieved than happy that the appeal was rejected, saying she's a manipulative and dangerous individual, and all 3 judges saw that today. Altiona Skarner remains at Rampton Hospital where she is being treated. Greater Manchester Mental Health NHS Trust, who had been responsible for Altiona's care, conducted a review. In a statement they said, "We treat incidents of this kind with the utmost seriousness and completed an internal rigorous review. Whilst this identified learning for our services, the review found there were no markers of deterioration in Miss Garner's mental state or behavior which would have foreseen this tragic event. NHS England disagreed with the Trust's conclusion, saying that it was clear she was unwell and posed a risk to others by 2017. Their report said, "Our most important finding is that the Trust's understanding of risk concepts was poor." Mark later demanded an apology from the Trust, saying that it was absolute nonsense. They are just trying to relinquish all responsibility, and she was their responsibility. They knew she didn't comply with oral medication, but they allowed her to take it on her own volition. That is a ridiculous thing to do. She was a ticking time bomb. I want the horrible story of what happened to my daughter to be told. It's not that I want people to feel sorry for us, but it needs to be told because it's an absolute public outrage. Following Emily's death, her school said they were going to have a memorial set up for her, and more than £11,000 was raised. The head teacher said she was blown away by the support the school had received from the community. Emily's school friends were helping to design a garden in her memory, something that would reflect Emily's love of life and the outdoors, also creating a space for people to go and remember her. Mark teamed up with the charity 100 Families, which supports relatives of those killed by somebody suffering from mental illness, to change the way patients are managed within the community. He said, "Someone said to me, 'What are you trying to achieve from all this?' It's not going to bring Emily back. It's not. But I don't want another family to have to go through what we have been through. I don't want Emily's death to have been in vain." In another fitting tribute to Emily, her mother Sarah launched a GoFundMe to raise money for Bolton Lads and Girls Club with the aim of helping children have support and access to various opportunities. It raised nearly £30,000 and was a truly beautiful way to remember Emily. For her devastated family and those left behind, life will never be the same. Emily was a bright and kind little girl with her entire life ahead of her. A life that would have undoubtedly been filled with joy and love and immense promise. On what was a Sunday that should have been filled with joy and happiness, her life was taken in the most appalling of circumstances, and the aftermath of her death is quite simply devastating. As Mark and Sarah said, Emily was the beat in our hearts, the spring in our step, and the reason we got up every morning. 37-year-old Erica Lloyd lived in Walnut Creek, California with a roommate, her 2 pet rabbits, and her 12-year-old son. According to her family, she was kind, fun, and able to get along with anyone. Like many people, Erica was struggling with the effects of the lockdown implemented in 2020. She worked as a hairstylist and was therefore stressed from being unable to generate income. She was also struggling with the pressure of adequately homeschooling her son. In June of 2020, she therefore decided to go on a camping trip to Joshua Tree National Park, 7 hours away from her home. She hoped the time in the outdoors would help relieve some of the stress she had been feeling for the past 3 months. Erica left for her trip on Sunday, June 14th. Authorities would later be able to confirm that she entered the park and was seen there alone. However, 2 days later, on June 16th, Erica stopped communicating with her family. That same day, California Highway Patrol found Erica's black Honda Accord near the intersection National Park, which was not very far away. The car had been vandalized with the front and back windshields as well as the radio smashed in. However, there were also signs that the disabled vehicle had been in an accident. The airbag had deployed and there was damage to the car's undercarriage. According to the owners of the towing company who came to tow the car away, the radiator and the AC condenser had been smashed backwards as though the car had hit a large object. They theorized that the car may have hit the berm of the road straight on. The San Bernardino County Sheriff's does not believe that there were any signs of foul play at the scene where the car was found. A massive air and ground search was launched for Erica. All-terrain vehicles and search dogs were brought in. Erica's camping equipment was at a campsite at the Jumbo Rocks campground. Cave and mine expert Doug Billings has volunteered his services to the effort. In 2014, Billings helped locate the body of a 19-year-old named Aaron Corwin in a mine not far from Joshua Tree. In addition to searching for Erica, he is keeping meticulous track of what areas have been searched for her. During the course of his investigation, Billings found a witness who saw a woman matching Erica's description walking along Highway 62 with another person a week after her disappearance. But this sighting has not been confirmed to be of Erica. It is conceivable that Erica could have walked to Highway 62 looking for help after her car was damaged and the wrong individual stopped to help her. Her family is also concerned that she may have become disoriented or suffered memory loss after suffering the impact of the airbag deploying during the accident. If she wandered off in a state of confusion, it could have been difficult for her to find her way back to the road. As of the end of July 2020, they held on to the possibility that someone may have found Erica, still confused and disoriented, and taken her in. Erica's parents live in Maryland but have traveled to California twice since Erica vanished to help look for her. They are appreciative of the kindness the local community has shown them and their willingness to talk about the case and put up the flyers they have been distributing in the windows of their businesses. Erica's son misses his mother and regularly asks his grandparents about their efforts, making sure they are still making phone calls and talking to people about his mom in hopes that she will be found. Dietrich Foster could seemingly make friends with just about anyone he met. He was outgoing and compassionate and therefore had a wide and diverse group of friends. He was quick to help out his family and friends, particularly when he could do so by cooking or baking for them. He was a joy to be around and loved to make others laugh. He was a good listener who was always there for people who needed to talk, but also a very clear communicator who could easily express himself about the things he was passionate about. Dietrich had previously worked as a corrections officer and was able to combine his love of travel with his career history and worked mainly as a traveling crisis or tactical private security officer. In 2020, he, like many people, was in between jobs because of virus-related shutdowns and travel restrictions. He had found a new position at FedEx and was due to start work there in April. While Dietrich loved his whole family, his two daughters, ages 5 and 13, were the center of his world. He and their mother, Jordan, were divorced but maintained a good relationship. Jordan and the girls lived in Kansas City, whereas Dietrich lived in Independence, Kansas, but he was still an active part of their lives. Jordan last heard from Dietrich on April 4, 2020. He called to tell her that his prepaid cell phone would be shut off in the next few days, but he would have a new phone soon. This was a perfectly normal conversation as Dietrich and Jordan spoke on the phone regularly, and he was always sure to let someone know where he would be or how to contact him. Jordan was concerned, therefore, when her normal communications with her ex-husband did not resume after a few days. She became alarmed, however, when he did not call her on Mother's Day. May 10th, Dietrich would call Jordan, his twin sister, and his mother every Mother's Day without fail. He was very close with his mother, so even if he had to skip the other two calls for some reason, nothing could have stopped him from calling her. While all of the people Dietrich was close to had been concerned by the fact that they were not hearing from him, no one realized that no one had heard from him until Mother's Day when they began reaching out to each other when he failed to make his customary calls. While Dietrich would see his loved ones when he could, they were spread out. Most of his family lived in Parsons, Kansas while he was in Independence, and Jordan and the girls were in Kansas City. This meant that his family and friends were not necessarily alarmed when they had not seen him in person in a few weeks. The family then went to the police in Independence to report Dietrich missing. The police have identified the last known sighting of Dietrich as being in Independence on April 12th. Dietrich's family distributed and hung flyers throughout the area with Dietrich's picture and information. However, many of the flyers hung in Independence were removed, leading to concerns that someone in the town may have been connected to his disappearance, but no motive for anyone to want to harm Dietrich has been identified. The Independence Police Department has not been able to publicly speak about their investigation due to its ongoing nature, but say that it is a top priority. Dietrich's family believes that they are working hard on the case and appreciate their efforts. Since he disappeared, Dietrich has missed both of his daughter's birthdays and his twin sister's 38th birthday. In addition to his traditional calls on Mother's Day, he missed his normal call to his father on Father's Day. Of course, it is emotionally painful, especially given that Father's Day was Sunday and I couldn't get a call from him and his daughters couldn't call him. His father, Philip Townsend, told the Parsons Sun in June. It's taxing in that nature. Anytime you can't get closure to something. That void, it's just there. Someone knows something. My great day will be them getting closure to this. Dietrich knows that his family loves him. 29-year-old Lauren Dimelo lived in Cape Coral, Florida, where she shared an apartment with her boyfriend, Gabriel, on Coronado Parkway. Gabriel would be the last known person to see her, and the apartment would be the last place she would be seen. According to Gabriel, Lauren was still sleeping when he left for work shortly after 6 a.m. on Friday, June 19, 2020. When he returned home that evening, Lauren was not in the apartment, but her cell phone was. She would not leave home without it. Gabriel then called Lauren's father, Paul, in California to tell him Lauren was not at home as expected. Paul was immediately concerned, and his worry increased throughout the weekend. On Sunday, 21st, Lauren did not call him for Father's Day, which was something she had previously never failed to do. Gabriel reported her missing that day, although her case was not assigned until Wednesday, 24th, due to a clerical error. When the formal investigation began and police realized the circumstances of the case, Lauren was reclassified from a missing adult to a missing endangered adult. Lauren's family did not wait for police involvement to look for her. Her father flew in from California, and her sister and mother went to Lauren's apartment from their homes in Florida. They began physically searching for Lauren, going door to door asking for information and distributing flyers. For Freedom's Park, a half a mile away from Lauren's home, has played a major part in her case from the beginning. Lauren visited the park regularly and liked to meditate there. On June 19th, the same day Lauren disappeared, someone found her purse left at the park. On July 2nd, Lauren's boyfriend Gabriel and her sister Cassie were searching the park when they found a burgundy shirt in the sand near the water. They believe that the shirt belongs to Lauren as it matches one Lauren regularly wore. The concerning aspect of this discovery is that the park had been searched multiple times since Lauren went missing. The shirt was taken into evidence by police. Lauren's family is adamant that she would not have voluntarily disappeared. The main reason they can be so sure is Lauren's daughter, who turned 6 2 months after Lauren's disappearance and was the center of Lauren's universe. Lauren also did not have access to a car or any money with her when she went missing. She had recently lost her job due to the economic impact of the pandemic, but was still owed one more paycheck, which she never picked up. Surveillance footage also shows her applying for jobs on June 18th, the day before she went missing. As the police investigation continues, Lauren's family also continues their own efforts to find her. Southwest Florida Crime Stoppers is currently offering an $8,000 reward for information in the case. This case takes us to Essex, England, where Jennifer Cronin lived with her daughter Susan. Jennifer was deeply devoted to her family. She was glamorous, sociable, kind, and gentle. She shared a strong bond with Susan, and the two were inseparable. In 1990, Susan met Kieran Lynch. Susan, a trainee hairdresser in her late teens, was 3 years younger than Kieran, a bricklayer and builder. Susan's friends noted that Kieran seemed to idolize her, and they appeared to be the perfect couple. It was essential to Susan that her new husband got along well with her parents, and fortunately, he did. The couple eventually had 2 daughters, Matilda and Molly. The girls were very close to their grandparents, visiting them at least twice a week. Matilda recalled thinking her father was a generous and wonderful dad when she was young. However, he had a different side to his personality, competitive to a fault, with an obsessive need to be the best at everything and maintain the image of a perfect family. Kieran claimed he worked hard to provide for his wife and daughters, but Susan revealed he struggled to manage stress and express emotions healthily. His frustrations often manifested in anger, leading him to destroy and break things. Over time, these issues only seemed to worsen. Susan said his reactions would become bigger and more aggressive, especially when alcohol was involved. One of their daughters said that she had vivid memories of screaming and shouting and plates being smashed. The day after an outburst, he would apologize and try and excuse his behavior. Like many who suffer from domestic abuse, Susan said she was ashamed and embarrassed and didn't want to tell anyone what was happening to her. One of their daughters would later say, "We weren't able to let the dog outside or anything. I was just really frightened. We had a strange relationship. If I called in sick at work, he would text saying, 'Are you not at work?' I knew he was driving around. Me and my mom had a really close relationship. My dad was quite violent towards me and my mom. If he would go for my mom, I would step in. I felt very protective over my mom. His personality flicked. One minute he'd be fine, and the next he would not be okay. In 2015, the changes in Kieran were also becoming apparent to Susan's friends, with one of them saying he appeared to be withdrawn and more gaunt. He was fitting an extension for her at the time, and sometimes he would fail to turn up for work. To Susan's shock, when a credit card bill arrived for a card that was usually reserved for big purchases, Kieran had run up a bill of about £3,000 by withdrawing money from various cash points. Susan questioned him, but he became immediately defensive and hostile, causing the tensions within the household to escalate. Things became even more serious when Susan picked up his work clothes to do a load of washing. In his pocket, she found a small straw and some cocaine. In a text message, she said to him, "No one or nothing makes you choose that shit. You choose that over your family." Kieran replied, "Please don't tell the girls it's drugs." His erratic and volatile behavior continued. On one occasion, Susan and Kieran were at home. He held a knife to his wife's throat and threatened to take both of their lives in a murder-suicide. Susan said the ordeal felt like it went on for hours. On another occasion, the loft had been rigged with a noose. In a series of text messages, Susan told him that she wished she could turn back the clock, but it was clear that they wanted different lives. They decided to separate in November 2016, and Kieran left the family home and moved back in with his parents. After 24 years of marriage, it was a difficult choice, but Susan knew she had to protect her daughters. With Kieran gone, the tension eased, and things felt lighter and calmer. It was a chance for Susan to take some much-needed time for herself and relax with her children. Susan said that it appeared that Kieran had got himself back on track, but this would all change when she moved on. After an incredibly stressful and difficult time with Kieran, things did begin to look up for Susan when she met a man called Mike. They had taken their relationship slowly, but over time she began to talk to him about her ex, the trouble she had with him and how difficult things had been. She wanted to have a clean break and a chance to start again with someone new. This also meant she had to tell Kieran and start divorce proceedings. Susan sent him a text message asking if they could meet up at McDonald's at 6:30 p.m. Kieran agreed, and knowing that Kieran was volatile and unpredictable, made an already difficult situation significantly harder. Surprisingly, however, Kieran seemed to take the news of her wanting a divorce well, with Susan describing the conversation as amicable. He later sent her a text message saying, "I'm glad you have found someone." She replied saying she hoped he would find someone too. Despite, on the face of it, taking the news of the divorce well, Kieran had actually done anything but. The following day, he sent her a series of text messages. "I don't care what you do. It's your life. Who am I to say? Give me $60K and I am gone from your life for good." Susan responded, "What about being a dad? Are you going to pay maintenance and still see them?" Kieran replied, "What, and pay for some to sleep in my house? I have nothing. You have it all. Sorry. I would rather have you killed." Following this, the situation continued to get worse. Susan also called Kieran's cousin Lisa, who soon arrived and could hear him destroying things. Kieran appeared with a hammer in one hand and a drill in the other, and told Lisa to leave it alone, saying that the situation had nothing to do with her. Lisa said it didn't seem like the Kieran she knew. He soon drove away and the police arrived not long after. The two police officers went into the house with Lisa and her husband, and Susan explained the messages that she had been receiving from Kieran. Before long, Kieran was back. He got out of his vehicle and began screaming and shouting that he was going to kill Susan. The police went out into the streets and Kieran said, "You're going to need more than two of you to get me in the car." He was subsequently arrested and led away in handcuffs. He was arrested on 3 counts, possession of an offensive weapon, threats to kill, and criminal damage. The threats to kill allegation, based on his text message saying he would rather have her killed, was argued to possibly be hypothetical. As for possessing an offensive weapon, as Kieran worked as a builder, he had various equipment in his van, including the hammer, so in order for that to go ahead, it needed to be proven he was unlawfully possessing it at that time, which they couldn't do. Therefore, he was charged with criminal damage. He denied the allegation at Southend Magistrates Court on January 29, 2018, and he was scheduled to stand trial on the March 29th. He was released with the conditions that he not go onto Susan Street, and he was to have absolutely no contact with her. Susan called him being charged with criminal damage a farce, saying that she could not believe that that was what he was being charged with. It was around this time that one of their daughters said she started feeling incredibly scared, saying that she felt the police were not taking their fears seriously. Just 12 hours after his release on bail, another call would come into the police. A mental health team alongside police officers were sent out to speak to him, but when they arrived, he said he was fine. So he was told to contact his GP, and that was it. Despite the conditions of his bail very clearly saying he was to have no contact with Susan at all, he paid no attention to this. He called her and turned up at her house, leaving her incredibly fearful as to what he might do next. He lied to people and said that Mike, Susan's partner, had been sending him gloating messages about his love life with Susan. He also sent what initially appeared to be a series of random letters and numbers to his daughter. When she asked what it was, he said it was the registration number of Mike's vehicle. She asked why he was sending it to her, and he replied, "He needs to speak with me." Okay. Tell her and her boyfriend. The incessant messages to Susan continued, "You and the girls have everything. I will always have my memories. Have you forgot not money, I suppose? Thanks for everything. A true lady. Enjoy." It was absolutely terrifying for Susan, and frightening for her to even have her children at home alone. He would make 80 calls a day and refuse to stop contact. As he failed to adhere to the conditions of his bail, Susan contacted the police again. Susan's mother, Jennifer, also became frightened and asked her daughter if she had been to her house on Boyce Green and used the hose to add more water to her pond. Susan hadn't. She believed it was Kieran, doing it as a way of taunting them by showing them how close he could get. The March 7th, 2018, Mike phoned Susan, saying he could see a man going into their garage. He then headed upstairs to look at him out of the bedroom window, whilst trying to stay hidden behind a curtain. He could see a silver van parked in the driveway, and Susan asked him to read out the registration number, and then begged him to stay inside. The van then drove off. About 10 minutes later, Mike went into the kitchen and there was no electricity. The police later arrived and it was discovered that the electric had been cut. Kieran sent gloating texts saying, "I hope your day has been great, honey," with 3 kissing emojis. Kieran's harassment continued to escalate and he would call Susan incessantly, refusing to move on. The police still hadn't acted even though they had said they would arrest him. Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings, the lead for stalking and harassment for Essex Police, who was not involved in the case but spoke about it in a documentary, would later say that as the police received hundreds of calls per day and no direct threats of violence had been made, it was deemed that there was not much risk to Susan, so staff were not deployed. He would add that in hindsight there was a failure to see this for what it was, stalking. Susan said, "Each time I called, someone came to take a statement. It would take hours. They would promise they'd get it sorted and then nothing ever came of it. Each time I called, it was as if it was an entirely new case." So the police never put a full picture together of how badly things were escalating. Basic things like filling in a form to record the presence of children in the home, which should have prioritized our case and had it escalated to a more serious level, wasn't done. On March 11th, Kieran made an internet search for the most flammable liquids. The following day, Susan's house phone rang, with one of her daughters answering it. It was Kieran. His daughter said the police were out looking for him, and his response was to laugh. He then, for the first time, extended the threats to his child by telling her he would her up. Kieran was added as wanted to the police national computer. Officers were dispatched to try and find him, so the first place they tried was his address at Tukes Road in Camby, but he wasn't there. As the search for him continued, it was advised that their daughters should not stay at the house, so one went to a friend's house and another went to Jennifer's. Jennifer and her granddaughter watched television together before heading to bed. When the lights in the house were turned off, the phone immediately began to ring. Susan's daughter called the police before calling her mom. She was terrified that Kieran was outside. She said he was in the garden and she didn't want to get up. Jennifer had become so terrified she had locked herself in the bedroom. Susan called the police at 1:50 a.m. Susan's daughter also called the police again, and she was advised to unplug the phones from the sockets. Despite the threats being made, The police said they did not have the manpower to send a unit out. But the threats just didn't stop. Kieran's texts were still abusive and cruel, referencing Susan's late father. "Thanks, you bitch. Hope you see your dad soon. Kiss." At 4:10 a.m., he sent her another text message, which was just a single kiss. Over a 24-hour period, the police had been called 6 times. The March 13th, 2018. That morning, one of the couple's daughters woke up to a text message. It was from her father, Kieran. It read, "I love you no matter what they say. Kiss." She didn't reply. Also that morning, the police had reassessed the case and it was downgraded from high risk to medium risk. Medium risk means that there may still be a risk of serious harm, but that it might not be imminent. Jennifer had locked herself in her bedroom because of how terrified she was of Kieran. Her granddaughter, who would spend the night with her, left the house, and Susan knew she needed to go round to be with her mom. She let herself in and locked the door behind her. Susan encouraged her to carry on with her day, adamant that she was not going to be bullied or allow her family to be bullied by a man who simply could not accept that their relationship was over. Jennifer and her dog headed out into the garden, and Susan watched them through the window as she made a cup of tea. Susan called Kieran's boss to try and find out if he knew where he was. He didn't. She then got a call from the police about their investigation. Then, without warning, at 10:48 a.m., Kieran turned up. Susan called 999. Kieran had been running with a knife as he screamed and shouted, swearing and being abusive as he ran towards Jennifer. His arm was on fire. He was also carrying a petrol can and threw liquid onto Jennifer's head, face, and back. Jennifer cowered and screamed as he continued to pour the liquid onto her. Susan ran down the road screaming for help. As she got to the bottom of the road, she turned around and noticed that he wasn't behind her. It was then that 2 neighbors came out and told her, "Don't go round there. There's 2 burned bodies." Kieran had doused himself and Jennifer in fuel and then set them alight. Susan immediately ran back to the house. Susan said she had no eyebrows, no eyelashes. All her hair was burnt off. Her hands were red raw, her face, everything was sort of black. Despite her horrific injuries, Jennifer was able to speak, telling her daughter how much she loved her and that she and her granddaughters were her world. Susan later said she wasn't going anywhere, that she was going to be all right. Kieran had also been seriously hurt, suffering major burns across his body, and he had ended up slumped against the wall in the garden. Susan described him as red raw and struggling to breathe. She said, "I realized he was sitting absolutely burned. I did get up and scream at him, at what he's done to me and the girls." The police, fire, and ambulance service were quick to arrive on scene, alongside the air ambulance that landed at the local golf course. Kieran was arrested on suspicion of attempted murder, and he and Jennifer were taken to hospital. It was later discovered that Kieran had bought a bucket and jerry can before going to a petrol station to buy fuel. 2 hours after the attack, Susan was taken in for questioning. Staff at the hospital told Susan that Kieran was not going to survive the night, as the extent of his injuries were too severe, after having 97% burns across his body. For Kieran's daughters, it was an absolutely impossible situation to be in. One of their daughters said that he was still her father, and she wanted to be able to say goodbye to him, tell him that she loved him, and that she wished it hadn't come to this. Kieran Lynch died that evening. A toxicology report found that he had both alcohol and cocaine in his system. Jennifer was taken to Broomfield Hospital's burns unit and was admitted into intensive care, with burns across 33% of her body. The burns were mostly on her upper torso and head. She was taken into surgery, but reconstruction was impossible. Due to the nature and extent of her injuries, it was decided that she would be instead given end-of-life care. She held on for 17 days. But tragically, on the March 30th, 2018, at 1:32 p.m., Jennifer Cronin died surrounded by her family. Dr. Benjamin Swift carried out a post-mortem at the hospital, confirming that her cause of death were complications from the horrendous burn she had suffered. For Susan, this had purposely been done by Kieran purely to hurt her, knowing how close she was to Jennifer and how much they meant to each other. Monday, January 21st, 2019. A week-long inquest was opened at County Hall Chambers in Chelmsford. Susan said that when she went into the inquest, she was just angry with Kieran for what he had done. But as the facts emerged about how poorly it had been handled by the police, she became more angry with them. I felt like he was upping the ante in what he was doing. Each incident I reported, he wasn't arrested, she said. Susan's partner Mike also spoke about the stress and worry caused by Kieran's behavior. It was constant, a lot of verbal abuse, my name being brought into things. It was getting more and more stressful. It was scary because we knew of the mental state, we didn't know what he was capable of. The jury at the inquest concluded that Jennifer had been unlawfully killed and that Kieran had died by suicide. It also found that poor communication by the police had factored into it. Susan gave a statement saying, "We are very pleased with the results. It's been a horrific year, really, to be pushed from pillar to post, and we felt all along that we weren't being listened to and that things weren't being done as they should be, and now that result means we can see it in black and white. We tried our hardest to get them, the police, to sit up and take notice, but couldn't understand why nothing was being done. I would hope the police have learned from these mistakes. It doesn't bring my mom back or their dad, but things definitely need to be looked at. They are supposed to protect and serve the public, and they certainly didn't do that for us." For Susan, the failures by the police to act on the concerns about Kieran meant that it could have been prevented. The police didn't protect us. We were shouting and screaming and waving it in their faces, and the failings were shocking. If they had done their job properly, my mom would be here. The inquest found 5 areas of police failings that were contributing factors to Jennifer's death, and that attempts to arrest him weren't made in a timely and efficient manner. Following the findings of the inquest, several officers received management action training in record-to-record keeping and processing of information. No police officers faced misconduct action. In March 2019, the Independent Office for Police Conduct found there had been a lack of positive action from officers, as well as a lack of clarity over domestic abuse offenses. A domestic homicide review was also set up, and the police were criticized for allowing Kieran to not be identified as the danger he posed, or that his behavior amounted to stalking. It also said there was an absence of proactive responses to breaches of bail and a lack of understanding of which officers should be responsible for this. It was later announced that Susan was taking legal action against the police, hoping they would accept legal liability for their failures in her dealings with them. She said, "I would just like the police to take proper responsibility. I feel so strongly that this could have been prevented if the police had done their jobs properly. I was going through hell and it just wasn't taken seriously. I've been left a single mom with no help and no family left. It's not easy. I'm disgusted by the failings of the police in all honesty." Detective Superintendent Stephen Jennings said, "I have met Susan Lynch and apologized to her for what happened in 2018. I have personally invited her to come and talk to our new teams. We are a far stronger force than we were 5 years ago in every way." Mike said Susan often suffers from flashbacks and wakes up screaming and crying. The absolute horror of what Susan and her family experienced is almost impossible to put into words, and the terrifying series of events that unfolded in front of her eyes are too awful to comprehend. Susan said watching my mom get burned alive by my ex-husband and being helpless to intervene was exceptionally disturbing. She didn't deserve such a painful and traumatic death. Mom still had lots of years to live and plenty of love to give her grandchildren. My poor girls have got to live with this forever. Thankfully, they have lovely memories of the person their dad used to be. To try and find the words to end a case like this is almost impossible. The trail of devastation and destruction left behind is quite simply unfathomable. Jennifer Cronin should still be here, enjoying life and spending time with those she loved most. Her life was ended in a way that is too horrific to even think about. And for those left behind, life will never, ever be the same. When we lose and when we love, we must hold on to those good memories and keep those happy times close and hope that with the passage of time, there will be an opportunity for healing. Robert Hutton grew up in Lancaster, California with his older sister, Edith. In 1971, Robert decided to embark on a cross-country adventure with Edith, her husband, and their newborn baby. They planned to live out of a pickup truck and find temporary work to support their travels along the way. The group eventually reached Colorado, and Robert decided to stay there rather than continue on with his sister and brother-in-law. For a while, Robert remained in contact with his family, making collect calls to his parents back home. He ended up leaving Colorado, leading a transient lifestyle as he looked for work around the country. The last anyone in his family heard from him, he had been in New York but was hitchhiking his way back to California. Robert's calls stopped, however, and the 21-year-old was reported missing by the end of 1972. Robert's mother was the main force driving the investigation into her son's disappearance for years. She looked at her old phone bills to identify the locations Robert called her from and got into contact with authorities in those areas to try to get their help. After years without any sign of Robert, she came to the conclusion that he must be dead, a conclusion which broke her heart. She died in 1989, never knowing what became of her son. Edith took over the responsibility of looking for her brother. By the late 1990s, she had the benefit of the internet for her search. Using internet databases and online phone books, she found almost 400 individuals named Robert or Bob Hutton. She sent a homemade postcard to each one of them, explaining that she was searching for her brother and wondering if he was him. None of them were. Edith then began researching unidentified bodies found all across the country in case her mother had been correct and her brother had been killed. Eventually, she found 6 sets of unidentified remains she believed could have been Robert. She reached out to the law enforcement agencies handling each of the cases but only got one reply from Jason Moran, a detective with the Cook County Sheriff's Office. In October of 2011, Cook County Sheriff Thomas Dart announced that his office was launching a renewed effort to identify 8 young men killed by infamous serial killer John Wayne Gacy. Gacy was convicted of the murders of 33 young men and boys whose bodies were found on his property or in a nearby river, but only 25 of their identities were known. DNA samples had been taken from each of the unknown victims, and Sheriff Dart asked that relatives of men who disappeared in the 1970s submit their DNA for comparison. Robert had gone missing the same year as Gacy's first known killing and, as a young white male, was consistent with Gacy's other victims. Robert's path from New York to California was unknown, so the possibility that he had passed through Chicago on his way could not be dismissed. He also often supported himself by working in construction, and one of the ruses Gacy used to get young men to come to his house was to offer them work with his construction company, BDM Contractors. Based on these facts, Detective Moran did follow up on the possibility that Robert was one of his unidentified victims. However, using police databases that Edith did not have access to, he was able to find a record of Robert living in Breckenridge, Colorado up until recently. His current whereabouts, however, were unknown. Since this information eliminated Robert as one of the unidentified young men, it should have ended Detective Moran's involvement in his disappearance. However, the detective was moved by the story of Robert's mother dying without knowing what became of him, Edith's years of working trying to locate him, and the fact that Robert's father had recently battled cancer. He therefore did not forget about the case, and in 2013, he decided to look for Robert in law enforcement databases again. When he did, he found a current address for him in the small town of Stevensville, Montana. He reached out to the sheriff's department there, and an officer went to the address and confirmed that the man living there was the right Robert Hutton and obtained his permission to release his phone number to his family. In April, Detective Moran called Edith to inform her that after more than 40 years she could speak with her younger brother. Robert had spent the first several years after his last contact with his family in the Southwest, hiking and caving in remote areas. He had no fixed address or means to contact anyone. He had also gotten involved with drugs during this time. By the time he tried to contact his family after a few years, their contact information was no longer current. He returned to California to visit them after he got off of drugs, but the family had moved away by then. Robert settled in Colorado in the early 80s, eventually starting his own construction company. He thought of his family fondly and made a small, unsuccessful effort to find them in the early 90s. After the economic downturn of 2008, he had trouble finding work. He had moved to Montana in 2011 because some of his friends had previously moved there. He found odd jobs remodeling homes and building barns and was eventually able to purchase a trailer to live in. which provided him the address Detective Moran had found in the database. In 2013, he was working in an ammunition factory. He was shocked to hear that his family still cared about him and that they had been working so hard to find him. The day after Robert was contacted by law enforcement, he spoke to his sister on the phone for the first time. He would continue to speak with her and their father on a weekly basis over the phone. Due to financial constraints on both of their parts, Edith and Robert were not immediately able to see each other in person. However, their father and stepmother were able to travel to Montana twice in 2013 to see Robert. In 2015, Robert moved to Nevada to live near Edith and see her almost every day. 2 out of the 8 victims of John Wayne Gacy, Detective Moran set out to have since been identified through DNA. In addition to Robert's case, Detective Moran has also solved 10 other cold cases that ended up having no connection to Gacy. Ricardus Pušiš was born and raised in Lithuania, but was living in the United Kingdom by 2015. He was working for the Nylair Leak Company in Chatteras and living in Bus Beach. The last confirmed sighting of him was on September 26, 2015, when he was leaving work for the day, although there was a potential sighting of him with a group of Lithuanian men later that evening. Ricardus failed to show when he was due back at work on the 28th, which was out of character. His disappearance was taken seriously from the start because concern about his safety had been raised just a month before he vanished. While they were conducting routine welfare checks in Wisbech, officers encountered a local resident who told them that Ricardus had recently been forced to move because he was being exploited. Police have described Ricardus as the type of character that was vulnerable to exploitation because of his circumstances. He had very little money, living paycheck to paycheck, and had no family in the area. His mother still lived in Lithuania, his sister lived in Germany, and he had cousins living in Ireland. He did not have a vehicle and spoke very little English, mainly interacting with the local Lithuanian community. When the officers found Ricardus at his new address, however, he assured them that he was fine. When he went missing, however, this previous incident raised concerns that he may have been taken to be used for forced labor. On November 17th, Ricardus's identification card was found in a park in Wisbech near Cannon Street. The following month, a 31-year-old man was arrested on suspicion of murdering Ricardus, despite the fact that his body had not been located. The man was ultimately released due to lack of evidence. The next major development in the case would not come until August of 2018, when police learned that a Facebook profile using Ricardus's name had been created. His relatives confirmed that the pictures on the profile were of Ricardus, although it was unclear when they were taken. They also tried contacting the person who made the profile, but they would only rarely get replies to their messages. When they did get responses, they would come long after their initial message and were generally very vague. One cousin did say that they received a message from the account that contained details about their last meeting with Ricardus that only Ricardus would have known. Police also tried to make contact through their profile, but all of their messages went unanswered. They could not reach anyone using the phone number associated with the account or trace its owner. They tried to trace where the account was being accessed but could not pinpoint an exact location, although the account appeared to be accessed in the greater Wisbech area. The existence of the Facebook profile and the possibility that Ricardus was still alive was not announced to the public for over a year out of concerns for Ricardus' safety. In November of 2019, it was made public as part of a renewed appeal for information in the case. When launching the appeal, Detective Chief Inspector Adam Gallup said that despite the Facebook profile, the disappearance was unlikely to be a case of deliberate absence, and that while Ricardus may still be alive and being exploited for labor, the case was still being treated as a murder investigation. In the following weeks, potential sightings of Ricardus in the Wisbech and Kings Lynn areas were called in, but Ricardus remained missing. In late June of 2020, police received new information in the case, and on July 1st, 5 years after he disappeared, Ricardus was finally found during a search of a wooded area in Harecraft Road. He had been living amongst the undergrowth in a primitive shelter which kept him well hidden and had not interacted with any other person in quite a while. Police did not immediately announce that Ricardus had been found, again out of concern for his safety. In the statement they ultimately released on August 3rd, The Cambridgeshire Constabulary announced that we now believe Ricardus made the decision to run away as he had been the victim of a crime, having previously been subject to exploitation. Given these circumstances, they waited a month to make the announcement so that they could be sure that the safeguards needed to keep Ricardus protected were in place. They are also helping him find resources to cope with the stresses associated with living under such difficult circumstances, away from contact, for so long. An investigation into who may have exploited Ricardus, potentially for forced labor, has been launched. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.